I dabbled in a lot of drugs in high school. I don't know how I made it out alive.
Yeah, we had a very similar childhood, minus the my parents weren't pastors, but they definitely held the shame, guilt, and
Yes.
punishment
Yes.
was the ultimate authority in my house.
He sent me to Vegas to work with his cousin who was a pimp. Everybody there was like, oh my God, I've never met anybody else who's been on the streets who made it out. No females be like, yeah, I was an ex-prostitute. And everyone's like, yeah, good job.
Right. What's up, guys? No Nonsense Podcast. Today, I've got a special guest. Mariah Pike is joining us, and my wife, Azimah, will be co-hosting with me. Mariah has an incredible story. She is a BJJ brown belt, a former dominatrix and sex work industry worker, and she went through some pretty insane, tumultuous times in life, and has really created a beautiful story of redemption. And she had shared a little bit with me via social media. We have some mutual friends through the jiu-jitsu community, and I just really wanted to get this story out there because I think it's an important story to hear. So Mariah, thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here.
Yeah, and Azimah, thanks for jumping in.
I'm excited.
Yeah, I wanted to, being Azimah does what she does with women, I just wanted to have that extra perspective on the podcast and add that into the conversation. So I think we'll just start. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Central California, right outside Fresno, Tulare, California.
Okay. So childhood, what was that? What was your childhood like? Was it?
It was odd.
It's odd.
I was homeschooled to the age of 15, and then about 15 and a half, I entered the public school system. My dad was a pastor, and but wasn't really present. He was very busy with the church.
Okay.
And so my mom she raised us and homeschooled us, and we were, it was a very, very intense Christian upbringing. Very sheltered, and then entered the public school system about 15 and a half. And so that's
Okay.
it was kind of it was very, very intense. Christianity, very sheltered. We weren't allowed to watch TV. So it was very, very, very sheltered.
Okay. And then, so when you enter the public school system at 15, is that like you just get burst into this entire new world?
Yes. I navigated and found my way towards the bad kids, desperately wanting to fit in. And Tulare, California, actually, the last statistic I read on it had the third highest pregnancy rate in the nation. So lots of gang activity. It was easy to find.
And how long before you got into the public schools did trouble start to find you?
Immediately.
Yeah.
So we grew up with Christianity, and Christianity is very faith-based of, it's just don't do it, no sex, don't do it. But there wasn't any education as to the safety behind it,
right,
or drugs or alcohol, and it was just don't do it. It wasn't like an education of as to why or the dangers behind it. And so sometimes you don't know the why of things. You're curious. Yeah, I dabbled in a lot of drugs in high school. I barely graduated. I don't know how I did, but somebody thought I deserved a diploma. So, it was, like I said, it was a lot of drugs, just experimenting with everything. I don't know how I made it out alive.
So it was more like they were talking about the right and wrong of everything, of don't do this because it's wrong or you'll go to hell. Or
Correct, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. It wasn't don't get involved in drugs because there could be addictions behind it, or, you could be in danger. It was just don't do it. So
would you say it's kind of like a punitive abstinence model, don't do it or else?
Yes, yeah. And don't ask why.
Mm-hmm. Which I know for me, as a teenager, it's you tell me not to do something, I'll definitely fuck around and find out.
Yeah.
And
if you tell me that I'm expected to have straight A's, I'm going to get D's because those are still passing. And very rebellious.
Yeah. So there was it sounds like and correct me if I'm wrong, was there a heavy weight of expectation in the house?
Big time. Mm-hmm.
Did it feel heavy?
It felt very heavy. My parents thought I was going to grow up to be a missionary.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, you took a little bit of an alternate route.
Slightly. Again, totally opposite. It was like, fuck around and find out.
Right.
Watch me. Yeah.
I'm curious. What was it that I mean, now in hindsight, right? Looking at you say you kind of like gravitated towards the bad kids, and I can totally relate to that. But I'm curious about like what particularly drew you into that crowd after, you know, coming from such a like controlling sort of way of living.
My mom ruled the house with an iron fist. Yeah. She had high expectations, and she was not afraid to be, she was not afraid to lay down punishment with ease, with quickness. So I think wanting to feel tough. You hang around with the bad. You don't want to hang around with the nerds. They're not tough. You know, the jocks are kind of tough, but like the thugs, the gang members, that's who you want to be accepted by. Because I think it was a way of wanting to be accepted, but also wanting to feel like you had a sense of control of what happens to you.
Mm. So is that what you saw in like the guys that are probably like the gangs and the street guys is a little bit more like they felt like they had a sense of control about them.
Correct.
Power.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
For sure.
And what kind of drugs are you getting into?
Oh God, I experimented with everything. Smoked a lot of weed, drank a lot, experimented with meth, tried crack.
Yeah.
Coke.
Yeah.
This other stuff called it was like an elephant tranquilizer, some sort of tranquilizer.
Ketamine.
Yeah. So it was just wild. Yeah, I remember trying that in someone's car, and they dropped me off at home, and like I remember like doing this army crawl down the hallway, praying to God my parents wouldn't wake up, like to my bedroom to try and hurry up and get in my room and shut the door before I got caught.
That sounds like ketamine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Cool. So yeah, we had a very similar childhood, minus the my parents weren't pastors, but they definitely held the shame.
Yes.
Was the ultimate authority in my house. Shame, guilt, and
Yes.
punishment.
Yes. And I carried that shame with me for many years.
I'm wondering, does that recipe ever work? Like shame, guilt, and punishment. Like I'm sure it keeps some kids in line, but
Yeah.
you just hear so many stories of the opposite, where like shame, guilt, and punishment, and then it just completely drives the child away from that.
Yeah, completely.
You
Yeah.
know, because I don't know. For me, there was no sense of safety in either parent.
No.
Because it was shame, guilt, and punishment no matter which way I was going to go, right? My mom was going to be the shame and guilt, and my dad was going to be the punishment, and I didn't want any of that.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Right?
For
So I was
sure.
like, oh, I could just be out of the house
Yeah.
and hang around the older dudes. And for me, yeah, the street guys were the guys that I wanted to be around, and the guys that didn't look scared and,
Yeah.
you know,
Absolutely.
had everything going on in the neighborhood. Everybody knew their name, and they had respect and all that stuff. And so it's like, oh, I'm gonna try to be just like these guys and hang around them as much as possible.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So how long before things go completely off the rails?
So I finished high school, and I knew I had to get out of town. I knew I had to leave. I didn't have a lot of sense, but I had enough sense to know that I needed to leave that area. I knew that the people I was hanging around were no good. I was just working this little part-time job at McDonald's, and it was basically paying for my drug habit. And I sobered up enough for about a month, and I joined the Navy. That was my ticket out of the town. And and my parents didn't have enough money to send me to college. No college was ever going to look at my grades and be like, yes. Yeah. And I just knew I needed to leave, so the Navy was my ticket out. So I did 4 years in the Navy, which is what landed me here in San Diego.
Oh, wow. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. And then are you getting in trouble in the Navy?
No, I actually did really well. The structure I thrived in. I didn't really like being told what to do, but I thrived in a structured environment. Mm. It really it kind of helped me. And of course, you move up in the rank a little bit and you feel kind of cooler and kind of tougher. And so that was kind of a little bit of an ego boost. But I did really, really well in the Navy.
Right on. And then when did you get out?
I got out in 2004.
Okay, cool. Mm-hmm. And then what started to happen after that?
So I have a daughter, and I had her in March 27th, 2004. So I decided to get out of the Navy because in the Navy you have to do so many years of sea time to get so many years of shore time. And, I still owed years of sea time, and so my daughter's dad at the time, he was in the Navy, and I knew I wanted to be home with her because they were telling me that I was going to get deployed, so I felt like it was time to get out so I could be there for her and just be a mom. And she was about a year and a half. His and my relationship took it really wasn't very stable to begin with, to be honest with you. We were two very lost people, two hurting people, and so we parted ways when she was about a year and a half. And I was, at the time, I found a job working as a legal assistant, getting a whopping $11 an hour. And I knew I needed a part-time job, and I didn't know where else to go. So I'd been looking at restaurants and bars, and I didn't have any experience, and nowhere was really willing to hire me except for a strip club. Okay. And they needed a cocktail server. I had never been in a strip club until that point in my life. So I walked in there just very culture shocked. It was a day shift, and I remember looking at the stage and seeing somebody on stage, and it's just like, oh God, what am I even doing here? And so I went and chatted with the manager, and he, asked me about my experience, and I was like, none. And, I came in there just all professional, like it was a real job. And he asked me just a few simple questions, and he said, all right, can you stand up and turn around for me? And so I did, and he's like, all right, you're hired. And I was like, okay, I guess that's it. So I started working as a cocktail waitress, and so I was working during the daytime for 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., and then I would come home for about an hour and change and get dressed and hang out with my daughter for a little bit, and then I would drop her off at another sitter's, from daycare to a sitter's, to go work from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. as a cocktail waitress. And I did that 4 nights a week, and I'm not really sure how I was surviving, but my job as a legal assistant was really starting to fail because I know nothing about the legal system. And he had kind of given me my attorney boss had told me that in my 3-month probation period that I was either going to be given a raise or be fired, and I knew what was coming. So I went ahead and quit. And so I went back to the club and asked if I could have more hours as a cocktail waitress, and I was still very new, and they said the other girls had seniority over me, so I would have to wait, and I had to make ends meet. So I went and got my dancer's license and began dancing.
Wow. Okay, cool. And what was there any, like, I don't know, did you feel comfortable getting up on stage?
No.
Was there any, like, so I know you recognized you needed the money, right? So it's like, okay,
Totally.
The money pretty much sounds like it drove that decision.
Yes.
Like, I'm going to do this and then just figure it out.
Yes. So the way this strip club has since then been torn down, it's been turned into a restaurant. So the way the strip club was set up, it wasn't like your typical strip club where the dance floor goes around the stage. It was like a half moon, and the part that was the wall was the dressing room behind it. And I remember my very first time on stage, when the second song came off, you're supposed to take your top off, and I remember I wouldn't turn around and face the crowd. I just stayed like facing the pole, and I just remember looking over my shoulder like, oh God. And then someone was like, turn around. And so I just remember like looking at the DJ like, wrap this shit up. And so the song finally ended, and I never went around like to collect my tips. I just ran back to the dressing room and cried.
So what was that conversation like with the management?
They didn't really care as long as you pay your house fee, but a couple other girls were very encouraging. They're like, the pole is your friend. You're like, turn around. And so slowly but surely I started getting a little bit more comfortable, but it took alcohol to get to that point, point of being comfortable enough to turn around and face the crowd and go around and, hi, did you see my dance? And I'm going to ask for your tips. And so, so that took a little bit of, but yeah, the Navy alcohol is very normalized, and looking back to my family history, alcohol has been very normalized as well. And so the strip club obviously is no different. And so I began drinking every day. And of course, clients or customers want to buy you alcohol, so it was free. And so, yeah, that kind of opened the doors for a major, major alcohol problem.
Do you find that that's pretty normal in the industry for women to need to loosen up with alcohol to feel comfortable up there?
Very normal.
Okay.
Very, very normal. Yeah.
And how much, I'm curious as I'm listening to you and I'm hearing like your initial, like a little bit nervous getting up on stage and being shy to turn around. How much of your upbringing do you feel like was like playing into that, if at all? Was there any conflict within you, like shame or conflict even just going in?
And so this is where the shame began.
Yeah.
So it started, and I remember thinking to myself, like, I was really kind of mad at myself, thinking that, like, oh, you grew up in this Christian home, you were homeschooled, you were in the Navy, you served your country, and now look at you, And so, yeah, the shame had definitely begun, for sure.
And do you feel like that became like a vicious cycle, like the shame, the alcohol, the work, shame, the alcohol, the
Yeah,
work?
and I feel like it built momentum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I could see that.
For sure. It built a lot of momentum as the alcohol increased and the accessibility to more drugs that were free, just like the alcohol was. So
Yeah.
It built momentum.
I remember feeling like that every time I would like go to like a harder drug, I would feel this, like I betrayed myself, because there was still the little kid in me that had like hopes and dreams and kind of believed in the DARE program to some extreme.
Right,
Like these
yeah.
drugs are really bad. And, like if you're doing heroin, you're a loser. If you're smoking crack, you're a loser. And I'm
Right.
like 15 smoking crack. And I'm like, oh man, this is not what I planned.
Right.
But here I am.
This is not what I envisioned for my life.
No.
For sure.
Yeah. So I can understand that. It's like making those concessions with ourselves.
For sure.
And yeah, and it drives more shame. And then like looking back at it now, then it just drives me into more avoidant behavior, right?
Yes,
So like I don't want
yeah.
to sit with this.
No.
Especially that young. I don't have the tools to
Right.
sit with that. So I just, whatever it is, sex, drugs, rock and roll, get me out of this. You know,
Yes.
like I don't want to feel this.
Yeah, so instead of facing the demons, you just drown them out with more alcohol, more
Yeah.
drugs. For sure.
Okay. And so just take me a little bit further through like the progression of
So, as luck would have it, I was driving home one night and I got a DUI. And that's kind of where the snowball began to pick up again, more momentum. So, yeah, I got arrested for a DUI. And as you know, DUIs are expensive. You get a suspended license, you got fines. Now you have to go to these DUI classes and AA meetings. And I got behind on my fine. And I got pulled over for having windows that were tinted too dark. And so the cop was like, oh, you're not supposed to be driving on the suspended license, blah, blah, blah. And so the system is designed, I'm sure, as you know, to keep you in it. And so you get arrested for that. And then, oh, you have a bench warrant for your arrest. You got behind on your... And so it just kept building momentum. And I started finding myself further and further behind as far as finances. And my car was repossessed. And I was getting behind on rent and knew that the walls were slowly closing in. So there was this guy that would come into the club. Well, let me back up. In order to try and get myself back up on my feet, I was, getting a cab. This was before Uber, of course. I was getting a cab ride to the club in the morning and sometimes getting a ride home. But I would go there when the club would open at noon. And I would stay till 2 a.m. because I was in this desperate mode of trying to get my car back and make sure that I wouldn't get kicked out of my place. And this guy would come in every once in a while. I'll just say, I'm going to try and avoid everybody else's name except for him, because fuck him. So his name was JR, and he would come in the club every once in a while. And he had, I knew what he was. He was a pimp. I knew it. And I remember him telling me, quite a few times, I can show you how to make a lot of money. And at first I was very resistant. I'm like, no, I'm good. And he came in the club and desperate times. So I told him, yeah, I need to make a lot of money. I'm about ready to, I don't know what else to do. I'm kind of at a loss. So he and I embarked on this journey. And my very first time walking the track, we went to Vegas. And got a little hotel, Motel 6. It was about 10, 11 o'clock at night. And, I knew what I had to do. So I asked him when I could come back in. And he said, you can come back in when you've either made $1,000 or the sun's coming up. And the sun came up.
did you engage in any activity with any customers in that first walk, or did you just kind of check out the?
Oh God, I didn't know how. I remember asking him like, "How do you? What do you even do?"
Yeah.
And obviously, you look and you got to be dressed in sexy, the high heels and the skirt. And he said it's just kind of like at the club. You'll know that look from a guy when you see it. And I was like, oh, okay, I know what you're talking about. But so there's two ways to go about walking the track. You can either walk the track like Las Vegas Boulevard or Paradise, which is very, very dangerous.
Yeah.
Or you can walk the casinos.
Yeah.
The problem with walking the casinos is you have casino security. And as I'm sure you know, casino security they're not regular security.
No, they don't play.
No. You could get 86 from all these different casinos and you don't want to risk that. So there's risk with either one. So I didn't want to risk walking the street, so I walked the casinos.
Yeah, the streets in Las Vegas, what people don't realize is like the streets in Las Vegas outside the strip can be really dangerous at night.
Crazy dangerous.
Yeah, there's a different type of hopelessness in Las Vegas as you get up by like Charleston and
Yes.
and all that stuff up near sort of downtown.
Yes.
That's a different type of energy that you won't really experience anywhere in California.
Yeah, I wouldn't even walk those streets
Yeah.
now.
Yeah,
Ever.
it's bad. I drive through. I'm in Vegas quite a bit, and one of the coffee shops that I go to is in the Arts District, and the Arts District is just outside of like the downtown area near Charleston, and just a couple blocks down, man, it turns into like Mad Max.
Real ugly, real quick.
Yeah, real ugly, real quick.
Yeah.
And so for those of you guys that don't know that, like there are some parts of Las Vegas that are pretty treacherous, especially for a woman to walk by herself. Like I'm fine, but like I would not have my wife walking
Oh
through
no,
there by
you're in
herself.
heels and a little black dress. Like,
No. So you did you ever do the streets, or are you pretty much stuck to the casino?
I did the streets here in San Diego, Alcohol Boulevard.
Okay. Well, that's a long time ago then, huh?
Yeah.
I remember hearing about that. I never saw it, but I remember hearing about
Now
that.
I guess it's National City.
Okay.
But it was Alcohol Boulevard for a long time.
Okay. And so do you remember the first time you took a customer?
I do. You could tell I was nervous, and he told me just take the money and go.
Yeah.
Like it was like this pity thing.
At least he had a heart about it.
And he's like, I'm only gonna give you $200, and I was like, it's fine, it's something. It's $800 more to go.
Yeah.
So
that's how they work and how they set you off with like what you need to make.
I'm not sure how it works for everyone, but for him, that was my mark. He said $1,000 or the sun's coming up. And I remember him telling me, I'm just a phone call away. Check in with me. And I remember calling. And no, he never answered.
How would you describe this guy? Like personality wise?
He came off as really, really sweet and endearing. But there was a whole other side to him that was not that. No, he was a boxer back in the day. So he was a big dude. He was probably about 6'2", 200 pounds. He was a big dude.
And did you feel the sweetness and endearingness in him initially? Is that what drew you in, or did you just need the money?
Well, both.
Yeah.
Well, both. Because we had, in the strip club, there's pimps coming through all the time. And there's some, I was like, oh, this guy's weird as fuck. But he actually seemed really nice. And so I think that's why I gravitated towards him versus anyone else.
You meet this, initial side of him, obviously, that he uses to bring you into the fold. At what point, if any, does there become like a dependence upon you for him, or does the relationship get more dysfunctional?
So the idea with having a pimp is you give them all your money and they pay all your bills. So I don't think I was ever really dependent on him because pimps are supposed to give you guidance as far as how to make money. And he was really kind of a fucking idiot, to be honest with you. Everything I figured out by myself through trial and error or by talking with other girls on the streets who were nice enough to share kind of bits and pieces of like what to look out for and stuff like that. So none of that came from him. And so I slowly started to learn that like this guy ain't shit and that I would have to figure things out for myself. So...
But then are you stuck in that relationship because?
I knew eventually I had to get away from him. I knew that we never lived together, but he did have keys to my apartment, And so I just, like I said, bills were getting behind and I was getting really frustrated. And so when I was in San Diego before, if I wasn't walking the track, there was Craigslist. And so when I would go on calls on Craigslist, we would go and he would drive and drop me off. And then obviously he'd wait out in the car. And when I got back to the car, he'd, ask me for his, the money. And if he didn't believe me, he'd dump out my purse. And at the time I had implants. So I'd cut slits in the bra and I would hide a little bit extra money, not a lot, but just I would cut a little bit off the top every appointment. And there was times when I would go to the club and he'd ask me how much I make. And I would, again, just a little bit off the top.
So he would take that money too, the money at the club too?
Oh, yeah.
Damn.
Mm-hmm.
All of it.
Everything.
And so in your mind, what is the benefit of that other than he's teaching you
They're
how to make money?
They're supposed to be providing you protection. Again, I realized this guy ain't shit.
Right.
So I knew that eventually I'd have to get away from him, and I knew that it was going to take some time and strategy. So again, I was just cutting a little bit off the top, and so in my apartment, I was stashing money away here and there. And in case he'd ever decided to rummage through my shit, he wouldn't find all of it. Thank God he never did. So got into a fight one night and ended up breaking his hand somehow. And he sent me to Vegas to work with his cousin who was a pimp.
Family business?
Yeah. So his cousin had a chick named Nikki, and she worked out there. And so he sent me to go stay with Nikki, because Nikki worked at the Spearmint Rhino. I worked at the Spearmint Rhino. Nikki also kind of knew the track, so he sent me there to basically pay for his fucking medical bills.
Wow.
And so I knew that this was, almost a year into this. And so I kind of had to wait for the right time. And when he sent me to Vegas for 2 weeks, I was like, this is it. This is the time. I knew I had enough from Vegas because he, I'd have me wire him money. And again, I would lie about it and cut a little bit off the top. And I knew that I was prepared. Okay, cool. I have enough stacked up where I have enough 2 months rent, good to go. I've got my car payment. I've got bills where I can cut him off. And so I had to kind of strategize a plan of how I was going to do it. So his car was in the shop at the time, so he had my car while I was in Vegas. And so I flew to Vegas and flew back, and he was picking me up from the airport. And when he picked me up from the airport, I had asked him, do you mind if I drive? Because at the time his license was suspended. And, because I was going to drop him back off at his place, and then I was going to drive myself back home. And so I had asked him, do you mind if I drive? And he was like, yeah, of course. And I was like, because of your license and stuff. And yeah, good idea. And so on my plane ride on the way home from Vegas, there's things in an argument. There's all these things you could have, would have, should have said. And so I had written out this letter of all the reasons why I wanted to leave. And just basically explaining all the things I wanted to say to him of why I didn't want to be with him anymore. But I was worried about him kind of flipping the fuck out. And so on the way back, dropping him off to his place, I asked him, do you mind if we get a coffee? And I specifically picked a place, a Starbucks, that had no drive-through. And that was nice. I picked a Starbucks near his apartment. And I asked him, do you mind if we go in and get coffee? And he said, yeah. And I was like, do you want one too? Just come on inside. I need to use the restroom anyways. And so I invited him in. And when we were waiting for a coffee, I sat down and I pulled out the letter. And I read it to him and just basically told him I'm cutting things off with you. And in that world, they call a female who's escorting without a pimp, they call it excuse the term, a faggot ass bitch. And so he was like, oh, so you're turning into a faggot ass bitch. And I was like, guess what it has to be. And so I left him there at the Starbucks. And I broke things off. And on the way to my place, I lived in a small apartment complex with only 20 units. So I called my landlord and basically was like, hey, my boyfriend, we broke up and he's been making some threats. I'm on my way home right now. I don't know. He has keys to my apartment. Do you mind changing out my locks?
Oh, smart.
So he changed out my locks before I came home, and then I stopped by the manager's office and picked up my new keys. And then decided from there I was no longer going to do Craigslist, and made a friend at the club who's a photographer and hooked me up with some really great pictures, and I started Highend escorting on these better websites. So I still continue to escort, but it was no longer on the track.
Okay. Wow. Had he ever gotten violent with you before?
No, I had seen what he had done. So I can't speak for every pimp. I just know what I was told. But so you're, I don't know, I guess you can say any word, right?
Yeah, you can say whatever you want.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in that industry and world, I guess you could call it, your pussy's made for making money and your ass is meant for your pimp. And so there was punishment, I guess, and reward involved in that. So that was his way of taking out punishment.
Okay. Wow. It's pretty dark.
Yeah.
Yeah. Man, for the record, like pimping is like the biggest low life.
Oh, yeah.
I can't even, because it's like you're, as a man and a protector, you're literally preying on people in their most vulnerable state and you're manipulating them into thinking that they need you. And the guy's like not giving you any game whatsoever.
None.
You're literally picking it all up on your own.
Yeah.
From the other girls that are on the street and like having to become hyper vigilant and completely unsafe. And it's like, man, that is the exact opposite of what a man can do. I feel like if you're a pimp,
Absolutely.
you're like scum of the earth.
He didn't even tell me how to watch out for cops because eventually I did get arrested for prostitution. I was involved in a sting and he was in the car down the street the whole time. I remember coming back. I was nice enough to the cops. They took my license, still wrote me a ticket and all the whole bullshit, but they were nice enough to not arrest me. And I remember walking back to the car. You know, this is hours later. You're being held up and questioned and all that stuff. And they finally decided to let me go. And, you know, I came back to the car and he was like, oh, it was a long appointment. Like, no, motherfucker. Like, you didn't tell me what to look for. Like, San Diego PD walked in as I'm fucking naked. Like, so, and that's the kind when I started to learn, like, this guy's a fucking dumbass.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of what started the knowledge of knowing that I got to get rid of this guy.
Yeah. Yeah. And how old are you at this time?
I was 25.
Okay. And what is your relationship like with your family at this time? Are you guys in contact? Do they know what you're doing?
They had no idea. I think they knew. I think they thought I was bartending. I didn't tell anybody what I was doing. No one knew. My daughter would get dropped off at her dad's house or a sitter, and I would try my best not to work on the weekends that I had her, and I really tried to shield her from that. But, you know, I would still work at the club if, you know, nobody was calling me for escort calls. So she would go to a sitter.
Okay. And now you're moving into a little bit more high-end work.
Correct.
Okay. What's the pay difference in the high-end work to the street work?
Street work could vary. You're really negotiating at the bottom of the barrel, whereas high-end escorting, at the time, I was starting at $400 an hour.
Okay.
So for me, that was, you know, a huge jump, especially, you know, 15-ish years ago.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And how long did you stay in that particular end of the business?
So I escorted for a couple more years, and it really started to take its toll on me. I was really denying a lot of calls and money just because I felt like it was just so draining to my soul. It was really, I started to slip into a really, really deep depression where I was not present as a mother at all. I just kind of existed. And I had a friend who was a photographer, and he was, he'd kind of help me out with my pictures for escorting, but he had also built websites for other women in the industry, and he's just very, very knowledgeable as far as like how to build yourself into a brand. And I remember calling him, and I was crying, and I broke down, and I was like, T, I can't do this anymore. I just can't. And he was like, well, what do you want to do? And I was like, I don't know, but I can't escort anymore. And so he was like, why don't you come over and we'll talk about your options. So I went over to his house, and he had kind of showed me the other facets of the adult industry. And he was like, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to do webcam? Do you want to dominatrix? And I was like, I don't know. I just can't do this. And he was like, well, how about dominatrix work? And I was like, I don't know. So do I have to sleep with the guys? And he was like, no. So I was like, all right. So he put me in touch with a couple other females that were dominatrixes and set me on the right path as far as books and websites and stuff like that to kind of get me in the right headspace to be a dominatrix. And so, so I took down all my escort ads and started working as a dominatrix.
And what was that transition like? Like, cause it's different. It's a way different service.
Way different.
Right.
So from going from an industry where men, where escorting men are very wanting to do things to you, to now being a dominatrix where men want you to do things to them, it was very weird. It was very strange, but at the same time, I guess it was kind of the perfect recipe at the time, because I was very, very mad at men as a whole. I was mad at my dad for not protecting me and my brothers from my mom. I was just mad at men in general, and so this was kind of perfect because I got to act out that anger, and they wanted it, so it was perfect. So yeah, it was different. It was good in the fact that you didn't have to sleep with these guys, but also you're doing the weird things that no one else really wants to do. So, but the pay was better, so that was good. So yeah, it was kind of and then he eventually built me a website. This is day before OnlyFans. He eventually built me a website, and I had members on there, and there was, content and all that stuff. So it kind of built into its own thing, where I kind of elevated myself into this status of power, I guess you could say.
Okay. I'm super curious as I'm listening to all this, and here I was actually thinking, like, man, probably gonna take some anger towards men after all this, right? Like, just like, I don't see how that you get out of that. Like, still thinking men are amazing.
I'm like, you want to be whipped?
Yeah.
Fuck yes.
Yeah. Are you able to, in this time, in this headspace, this emotional space, like your own sexual life and your own like ability to be with a man, does that exist, or is it literally just like that part of your life just turned into money only?
It was money only, and then I would find a guy that I kind of liked, but emotionally unavailable, which was safe for me because there was no way I wanted a commitment, and you subconsciously you're not commitment quality. So it was just kind of a fling here, a fling there, but there was no actual commitment.
Okay, so I have a theory, and your theory, your experience kind of feeds into my theory, right? I hear a lot of people, mostly women, but I hear men complain about this on occasion, about meeting emotionally unavailable people, right? And I believe that people that serially attract emotionally unavailable people do so because it actually is safe, because the thought of actual intimacy is so terrifying that it's easier to bring and attract this certain type of person that is emotionally unavailable, because we'll never actually have that connection, because having that connection could actually mean losing or having to maintain that connection, and that would actually be more terrifying.
Your theory is 1,000% correct. Because whenever I would meet a guy who was really kind and sweet, was cool with me being a dominatrix, but also wanted to get to know me on an intimate level, I was emotionally avoidant, and so I would ghost him or just tell him it's not going to work out, or find a way to sabotage for sure. Yeah, your theory is 100% correct.
Yeah, I don't know if it's true all the time for all people, but I do believe that it's a dynamic that exists largely.
Yes,
so like
for me it was.
Whenever I hear a woman or a man talking about emotionally unavailable people that they meet, I almost like my head instantly goes there, and I listen to them talk more and more, and I'll ask questions, obviously. And it's like, and they get fucking pissed if that gets pointed out. Like I've had some women get very upset by just offering that question. Do you think it's possible that this exists?
100%.
Sometimes not ready for that. What do you feel about that, babe?
Yeah, I mean, also as I've been thinking about it, right, like that response, or your body's response to want to protect itself and like wall up around your heart, like that, I think inherently comes from this need for survival and protecting yourself, right? Like, and listening to your story, going through like, probably even like throughout your growing up and going into the world in the sex industry and everywhere, that is kind of a thing that you have to do, protecting yourself emotionally as you open yourself like sexually, so that you're not as emotionally vulnerable as you would in, I guess like normal relationships. And and I can totally relate to your story as well, in my experience of sex addiction as well. It wasn't about, that deep connection, ooey gooey, lovey stuff. It was just like, I got to survive. I've got to do what I need to do to move on. And that becomes like that safety container, it can be pretty hard to undo when, like, you know, you're just hardwired on survival and looking out for
Yes.
danger.
Absolutely.
You know, like it's hard to distinguish between like real or imagined threat because your body's already like so conditioned that
sure.
you know certain things are just not safe in the system.
Yeah.
You know, so that fear of intimacy sure is real because in the past, like maybe opening your heart out to somebody or being vulnerable has led you into spaces where
Right.
you know it did not serve you. It did not.
Right.
It was not the protection that you were allured into in some.
Especially if you've never been vulnerable a day in your life, growing up, your childhood, you've never been vulnerable.
I was wrong to be.
Yeah, yeah. Don't talk about your feelings. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Go pray.
Yeah, we don't do that. Just pray it away.
Exactly.
Wow. So you're doing the cam stuff now. You're building a business model that's different. Does this business model, it sounds like this business model feels more empowered.
For sure.
Okay.
For sure.
How long does that go on for?
About 6 years.
Okay. And what was the deciding point that, like, I can't do this anymore? Any of it?
My soul was just being drained. I felt like I was just living, I was just making money and not really serving a purpose. I just felt like I was simply existing. And I just felt like my soul was just empty. And my entire life growing up in a Christian home, I thought that spirituality and Christianity were one and the same. And there was a part of me that was really wanting spirituality, but feeling like that was Christianity and not knowing that you can be in touch with your spiritual self without having to feel condemned by what you were doing. And I felt the shift started to change. And slowly but surely, I kind of started